empathy is the concept of I know where you're coming from. I know why you're doing what you're doing.
But empathy is not a virtue. It's not inherently always good or constructive or holy.
Is this manipulation? Are you just tricking people into saying something? What are you doing?
Like, you may sit with someone who, no matter what, is going to go do evil things. No matter how much you understand them, can't stop it. No matter how empathetic I can be, and no matter how much emotional presence there is, there's no guarantee that we can turn someone good, in air quotes.
Maybe the answer is, it depends on what the intention of the other person is. Because if their intention is to work together and to listen, then you have ground to work on.
I can just help someone say something new so they can do something new.
Hello everybody, this is my conversation with Adam Ayala, his second time on this podcast. We are discussing and actually also following up the concept of empathy, which is the episode 23 that I did recently as part of this podcast. It was a 22-minute episode in which I outlined the concept of empathy and a couple of specific techniques that are part of that concept, at least in the view that I'm taking. So that's the starting point of the conversation with Adam. So questions that we talked about, or questions that we asked ourselves out loud, were questions like, okay, what is empathy to begin with? What is sympathy? What is pity? How can you properly use empathy in all sorts of different situations, both psychoanalytical and as part of leadership positions and just in general interactions with people? So we got a couple of different angles on the concept of empathy. And yeah, of course, talking about something like psychoanalysis takes us down a rabbit hole of, multiple rabbit hole even, with all sorts of different things coming forward. So yeah, there's a lot that went on into this conversation. Please enjoy. I hope you will like it. And if you do, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. And as always, leaving a comment or a positive review is also a great way to help out. So if you have the time to do that, that will be greatly appreciated. And with that out of the way, here's my conversation with Adam Ayala. Adam, great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. What's going on, Jeffrey?
Yeah, pretty decent. How about yourself?
Can't complain.
Oh, great seeing you. So I think the conversation today is going to be mostly about empathy. It's something that we wanted to discuss for quite a bit already. And you saw the empathy episode that I published earlier, episode 23.
Yeah.
Which was kind of a preparation for the conversation that we would have at some point, because I knew that the empathy thing would come up. It's a conversation that a couple of times already happened, especially regarding the definition about what empathy is, what techniques go into it, and how the different fields, let's say, can approach empathy. So you from your psychoanalytical field, and me, I guess, more from the practical / leadership kind of way that I laid out in the in episode 23. So let's just get started with a beautiful question that I think might kickstart the rest of the conversation. So in our last conversation in episode 7, you mentioned John Madonna, the writer of Emotional Presence. And he defined emotional presence as the ability to sense, feel, and think the experience of the patient. In what way, in your opinion, is emotional presence different from empathy?
Yeah, so I think it's about the goal, right? Because then the next line is it's the fundamental for starting anew, the chance again to relive and so reformulate the beginning of human psychic experience, right? So if I have someone on the couch or face to face, whatever, I'm working with someone, right? I'm trying to understand them and I'm trying to help them talk, but there is a big regressing someone back to the beginning of their life, right? Where if you have empathy for someone, you're a boss and you have people that you're managing, you're not trying to regress someone so far back, right? Because I think empathy and emotional presence, because your definition of empathy was pretty much the same thing as Dr. Madonna's definition of emotional presence. But I think it's just the end goals are very, very different, right? You cannot, you if you're a boss and you have a whole bunch of people, you can empathetically listen, but you're not trying to fix trauma, right? Like you're
Hmm.
not going that you're that would be it would be inappropriate anyway, right?
Hmm.
To try to do that. So I think it's like the same launch point. It's like saying car, right? And one's a minivan and one's a truck, right? They just got like different utilities, but they're both a car or vehicle, right? Um, I think that's like the starter point. I at least want to start with that. I think it's the same thing, different goal.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then the
Yeah.
techniques that we use to with that goal in mind are going to be different, right? Like you'll repeat, like one of the things you said in the podcast or when we've talked a million times is uh, you'll repeat back what someone says, right? And like in a condensed version so they know they're understood. And like initially we won't do that. We wait for the contact function. So like a psychoanalyst will just be quiet for a long time. I mean, if someone is like just talking to you normal, you talk back. It's not always like that, right? But there is this idea of waiting for the contact that actually someone's actually asked me a question before I say something. And then I might not even repeat it. I might ask an exploratory question about what they said. It's not I don't know if I want them to think I understand them. I think I want them to be curious to say something new because
Mm.
I don't have say something new and I don't have the assumption that what they're saying is true, right? I don't have the assumption that it's false either, right? But I don't there's a benefit of the doubt that it's true, but we're trying to see what is unconscious and what isn't said, right? Which will reveal more truth. I think that's a better way. It's not that they're lying, it's that it's not fully true yet or fully unconscious to conscious, right? And I wouldn't do that with someone like if I have an employee, I wouldn't do that, right? Even though I'm trying to, the goal is similar. I'm still trying to understand the employee.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be highly inappropriate in that specific situation. So the scenario that you're laying out is you're present with a person. And you also mentioned this in our original conversation that we had, and I believe you called it the technical term. I believe was follow the contact, if I remember it correctly.
Yeah.
So even someone can even like ask a question out loud, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are aiming it at you. It might also mean they're pretty much asking it themselves. And just thinking out loud, and then you're just letting them do their thing. You're letting them explore that cave themselves. And when they ask you a question in this case, you are asking an exploratory. When they lay in contact, you're asking an exploratory question, which is then based on that empathy thing. Like you're trying to understand what they're going through, and you're trying to feel their feelings to look at the world through their eyes. Um, but the aim is different. In this case, your aim would be to allow them to continue exploring the answer themselves. Where the aim that was laid out in the podcast episode would be different. It would be, if I understand where you were coming from, I understand the moves that you are making, and I can help, or not even help. We can collaborate together to go to a place that is optimal for both of us. So the idea there, correct me if I'm wrong, the idea is both those definitions have something to do with understanding the other person, understanding the other person's feelings, while yours is aimed at continued exploration, and mine is aimed at, well, mine is not really mine. It's based on someone else's work, but is aimed at collaboration towards an optimal outcome.
Yeah, and it's true for both. I mean, we're trying to be collaborative. That's why it's called emotional presence. So we're building something together, right? It's hard to, it's interesting trying to parse this out together. I actually like haven't really been able to think about it that way. Let me think. Let's use an example, right? Like let's use an example, right? Say I have a client and they're talking and they're like, I don't know why my husband's such an idiot, right? Technically is a question, but they're not really asking me, right? They're kind of just frustrated outside set of question, right?
They're venting.
Yeah, we'll call it a vent, right? And we're kind of taking this out of a context, but let's just do this we can with it, right? So I have a couple of choices. I can be quiet and let them have their next thought because they just had this this frustration. So it's like, what's next after that? Because maybe no one's ever let them say anything. So because if they said this to their mom or their dad or to their friends, people answer back, right? So then they give you the opportunity to sit with it, right? And then mattering where we're at in the analysis, if this is a long analysis and the relationship is good enough, I can ask a question of, well, why did you marry an idiot, right? And be very direct, right? That's very far into that. That is not even the first 5 years of an analysis, really, right? And that's ego-centered. So that's to touch someone's ego, and someone has to be strong enough to take that, right? A better question would be an object-oriented question where I ask, like, well, why is he such an idiot? You know, or what makes him such an idiot? It's more exploratory, and it's not about the client. It's about an outside object. So this husband, right? Or like I said, I just be totally quiet and tolerate the feelings in the silence, and then also you're also seeing, like, what are the feelings in the silence? Is it a relief? Is it a stress? Is it a sadness, a happiness in the silence? It's also the analysis of that's the transference, right? It's just the feelings that we're getting from each other, right? So it's like this, like, heavy work that you're doing.
That concept is called transference. So if you have a client who has a lot of emotion and then is explaining where that is coming from by telling you the story of what they went through, and you understand that story and you feel their feelings, from emotional presence. Is that concept called transference? So the concept of the transferring of their experience or feeling, I suppose, to you?
It's like I'm feeling what they're feeling, right? Without getting into Freud and, like, going into deep, like, technical concepts. The transference is, what feeling am I getting from the person, right? Like, some classical transferences would be like, oh, if I become the dad transference, right, with someone, am I a tyrannical dad? Am I a aloof dad? Whatever, right? That could be a transference, and there's a whole bunch of feelings within that, right? So that'll be the transference, and the countertransference would be like, oh, do I feel like they are my son or daughter, right? And then our root is that a relation, kind of the transference we're building, because that's something that needs to be healed, right? It's kind of like a classical transference situation.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's the co-creation of the emotional presence, because emotional presence is like, it's supposed to be, it's like a real space within the office, which I think virtual might lose in some way. I don't know. Virtual's way too new, right? But it's like a real space within the office that is co-created with each other, and it's not the same with anyone else. It's building a relationship, right, with real severe boundaries that can't be broken, but it's still forming a relationship.
Right. So one of the things that I had trouble with in the beginning of trying to understand the difference between sympathy and between empathy was, what is the exact difference between the two? And for as far as I understand it, is that sympathy is the concept of feeling pity for someone. It's like the idea of, if somebody lost a loved one, that you throw your arm around them and you cry with them, and you tell them how sorry you are for their loss. That is sympathy. And the other side is being sympathetic for something. So if you are sympathetic for something, that means there's a person or a company or an ideology or a government or anything at all that does something that you are sympathetic to, which means that you approve of it, that you have that same mindset, you agree with what is happening, that the choices that are being made. So sympathy is like the alignment. So I think that sympathy is like the alignment of ideas, of thinking. There, where empathy is more you can, in my personal opinion, you can have empathy for anybody. Doesn't matter how evil they are, how many people they murdered, for example. You know, the biggest murderers in history, because empathy says nothing about I agree with what you are doing or what you are saying. Empathy is the concept of I know where you're coming from. I know why you're doing what you're doing. I understand what led to that. Doesn't mean I agree with anything that you are doing right now. You know, I can be completely 100% opposed to it. But it's the concept of understanding the person. And so to flesh it out just a little bit, just so people know who are listening what that is based on. When I'm talking about empathy, it's like it's so there's this very well known ex FBI negotiator called Chris Voss. And Chris Voss, who has since left the FBI and who has started a company called the Black Swan Group, produced a concept called tactical empathy. And tactical empathy is a collection of techniques that can help people negotiate properly. It has been laid out in the book Never Split the Difference, negotiating as if your life depended on it. And a couple of those techniques are, for example, mirroring. So like repeating the last 2 or 3 words back to someone from someone's sentence, just to, to invite them to tell more about it. Or labeling, it's starting a sentence with, it seems like, it sounds like, or it looks like something is happening, which is less accusatory than alternative sentences. It's those kind of techniques that can be used to negotiate, but also to communicate, and therefore in essence, to collaborate better with people. So all those techniques, if I'm talking about empathy, it's using those techniques pretty much to gain understanding of the other person. So that is the ground where I'm coming from. So back to the question, and to summarize it, is it a correct statement to say that sympathy is aligning with the person's ideas, and empathy is understanding the person's ideas? If you make it as generic as possible, would that be a correct statement?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to be correct. I have an opinion, right? I don't know. We have to go back to like the Latin or the German for it, right? Because in my mind, between empathy, sympathy, and pity was, oh, I'm glad that didn't happen to me. Like that's pitying someone. Sympathy was, oh, like I feel bad for that and I hope that goes okay. Like when you watch commercials of like dogs and they need help and you're like, oh, like I have some sympathy for that, and I don't get any money. But I hope dogs do well in the world. I don't wish bad about dogs, right? And then empathy would be the sympathy plus action. Like I'm actually doing something about it, right? That's how I always took it. I don't know if that's right, but that's how I always felt about it. I don't know if that aligns with how you're saying it.
So I like to have the clear definitions, because the pity so you're saying that the pity part is the I'm glad it didn't happen to me part.
Yeah, like
so that's completely, you're not aligned with the person at all. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm glad it didn't happen to me,
I mean,
and that's it.
Yeah, you agree that what happened is bad, but the initial impulse is, oof, like I'm glad I didn't get knocked out, but everyone agrees getting knocked out is bad, right? Generally, right? But there's pity,
Right.
there's no sympathy, and there's definitely no empathy, right? Like you may even
Right.
laugh, it may even be funny, right? Pity can go into a little bit of like of that of, I don't know if that's necessarily comedy. No, it's not necessarily comedy, but it could be funny. We may laugh when we pity something.
So let me give an example and ask me tell me if this then falls under the category of pity.
Okay.
So if you hear a story about a plane crash, I don't know, on the other side of the world,
Mhm.
doesn't matter where it is, but right, the people that died are so far away from you. You know, it's for you, it's like a news article. It's a bit controversial to put it out like this, but it's nothing more than a news article in essence. But at the same time, you know, there's this idea that it's a terrible thing that happened, and you're looking at it and you're like, man, that's damn, that must be terrible for everybody involved over there. Is that pity?
That sounds like sympathy. Pity would be you people who heard about the LA fires or the flooding in North Carolina and they're like, I'm glad that didn't happen to me, and taking it further where I'm happy it happened to them, right? Pity can breed hate. I don't sympathy
Ah,
and empathy don't
okay,
breed hate. I'm saying sympathy's kind of in the middle. Pity will breed hate, and empathy breeds action, constructive action. Right.
right. So pity can also be aimed at wishing harm on someone else.
Or just happy it happened to them. I'm glad it happened to me, right? Like just the baseline, and then you can add onto it. I'm happy it happened to them, right?
Right, right. Okay, yeah, that's completely not aligned with the whole sympathy and empathy definition, I think. So you said that okay, so moving on to sympathy, it sounds like my definition of empathy is your definition of sympathy. It's the not necessarily the alignment of ideas, but it's more like the understanding where the person is coming from, understanding what they're feeling, and then you're saying that empathy is like that plus taking action. So is that a correct summary? And what do you mean by action exactly? Well, what is action?
Action, right? So let's say you have an employee and they're coming to you because they're having a problem with a project, right?
Hmm.
You can have sympathy for them, like, oh, that, like, I actually genuinely feel bad that this project is hurting, and you can just like let them talk and okay, like you understand it, but you don't really do anything. You kind of let them vent. That's something. I think the empathy comes in with action if you can take some action to relieve some stress or make this project more efficient, right? To actually like do something, right? Because the same thing when let me think of how can I make this more personal? Or when you sit and talk with people, right? I don't think you're sitting in sympathy with people by letting them tell their stories. You're sitting with an empathy because you're engaging them and having them say some new things and think some new things and actually be able to talk for the first time and build a narrative, right? That's beyond sympathy. Sympathy is very, I always take it as passive. I could be 100%
Right.
wrong,
Okay.
right? I'm 100% wrong, but that's how I always took sympathy as passive. It's kind of like it's like lukewarm kind of deal. Like I don't care about anyone's sympathy. Like no one cares about sympathy. Like or it's not. Sometimes it's like sympathy can maybe sometimes get condescending. Like bless your heart. It's like a weird sympathy. That might be pity, but that's like a weird sympathy in America, right? Like I'm getting a little bit off topic, but yeah, I think we're thinking about the same functions. We're just using different words just because we're coming from different sides of it. Yeah, I don't
Mm,
think there's like a wrongness as long as we're not being assholes in this world. Like that's who cares about definitions at some point.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it does make sense that sympathy is passive because so I like the action part. So I think we're pretty much aligned on what empathy means. Um, because I do agree that there's a form of action in there. It's not just you're not just listening just for the listening's sake. You're doing in your case you're engaging with a client in order to well collaborate with them in order to find a solution that makes them feel better. You know that makes them better. So that's the action part on your side. You're there in empathy with them to help them to guide them towards the end of the cave pretty much. And sympathy lacking the action side that makes sense because you can be sympathetic to something. That means you are aligned on ideas. Doesn't mean you do anything with that. Well, mm, hmm. Okay, let me ask you a very weird question about the action part. Controversial question. If someone is sympathetic to, I don't know, to a destructive ideology. Let's just take an extreme example. Let's just take Nazism, for example. If somebody is sympathetic to Nazism, that can lead to action. That can lead to that person, doing something with that mindset. So that is also an action part then, right? Or is that action then outside of does that action go further than just strictly being sympathetic to a specific mindset?
So I'm going to stick with sympathy is passive, but it is a necessary part to either branch off to, let's say, the trees of empathy and emotional presence, right? To go that way. So we'll call that a constructive branch. So what would we call the destructive branch? Someone has sympathy for Nazis and then they go into action. That I don't think that action we call empathy, or would it be called empathy? They have empathy for Nazis. Would it be destructive or corrupted empathy? I don't know. We could call it corrupted empathy, something like that.
Corrupted empathy.
Right? Or destructive empathy. I don't know, corrupted, destructive, something like that, right?
Mhm.
Because the goal is the same, is to understand and know, and then they take action to promote, right? Even if it's something bad. It's still the same goal. It's just you're using a tool for evil. The tool's not evil. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, so whether it's sympathy or empathy, it's a mechanism to align yourself with something or someone. That doesn't mean that something or someone is a good thing. So it can be, you can aim it at the wrong thing. So you can, to get this example, you can be empathetic towards a Nazi, but then the result of that is bad. It's not good.
Sure.
So empathy by itself is not virtuous. That's pretty much what I'm getting from this.
I'm going to say yes because I don't know better, and that's where we're at right now. We might figure it out that we're wrong, but I'm going to say yes right now, right? Because I'm trying to think. I don't watch like true crime documentaries, right? But I imagine like there's a serial killer, and then like a serial killer like seduces someone to go kill someone else, and like I wonder if there's like some kind of like idea of empathy. I don't have like a really good extreme example, right? But through empathy, can we do bad things? Oh, that's not a great example. Forget that example. I don't think I can use it. I'm not good with crimes. So,
yeah,
right?
you clearly don't watch it a lot. Me neither, by the way.
no. Well, it means, someone doesn't know anything about the Nazis. They hear about it, right? So they read Mein Kampf, or they hear whatever political side calling the other political side a Nazi 1,000 times a day, right? So the word is used, right? So they go learn about it and then say they have sympathy for actual Nazis, like they're actual real neo-Nazis, right? Then they go into action. They say they give money. Let's say they give money and they protest, right? Those are big actions. So they have empathy. What was empathy again? I want to make sure I got it. It is the understanding.
Yeah, understanding and feeling the feelings from another person.
Yeah, so they understand and feel the feelings of the Nazis, right? So that is by definition empathy. And then you can do bad things understanding that. Even understanding that we're not morally good, right? Psychoanalysis says we're bent towards evil, and it's pretty much religious, right? We're bent towards corruption. So yeah, you go do bad things through empathy. And then I think empathy stops. Empathy was used for a second. It's just like a stop on this runway to go do whatever's next, right? Fuel narcissism, right? And once the narcissism is there, there's no empathy, right? That stuff goes away,
How do
right?
you fuel a narcissist with empathy?
Well, empathy is a tool to understand something, right? So once they understand, like, oh, what the heck do Nazis say? Is the Jews control the weather? Something stupid, right? And they say that is their understanding, right? Then cut off. There's no more thinking, right? Because empathy is the thinking part, right? To understand, you have to think and contend. Empathy dies. There's no more thinking. There is ideology. So then you just act out ideology and you become part of groupthink, right? And we can call that what happens in 1985, right? Let me see if I pick out the quote from 1985. I actually had it here recently. So never again will you be capable of ordinary human feelings. Everything will be dead inside you. Never again will you be capable of love or friendship or joy of living or laughter or curiosity or courage or integrity. You will be hollow. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves, right? So through empathy, you gain understanding of the group, and the group squeezes you out and fills you with their ideology, and then you're just a slave.
That sounds like the soul murder concept that you laid out in the last episode.
Yeah. Well, this soul murder and what Orwell was talking about, same thing. I'm sure Orwell read about soul murder. It's an old. It's like I feel like it's
Old concept.
Yeah, it's an old concept, right? It's just never been popular.
I do like the I do like the idea. I haven't really thought about it like that because strictly before this conversation, if I have to lay out empathy, I will classify it as a mechanism to understand a person so that you can make better choices, either yourself or together, right? Because the better you understand the other person, the better you can predict what they're gonna do, how they're gonna behave, what they're struggling with, how you can help, how you can collaborate, those kind of things. So it's a mechanism to align with a person, out of which you can do something else, whatever that thing may be. But it's a communication mechanism, and it doesn't necessarily say how it's used. And it makes a lot of sense because you can use it very maliciously in the example that you just gave. Doesn't mean that you're working towards something good. Having corrupted empathy or destructive empathy, as you just mentioned it, can lead to devastating results. If you have empathy, if you're empathetic to the wrong thing, to the wrong people, that's not going to lead to good things.
It's kind of scary that you can sit, think, and understand someone, and they can do bad things. And that's like, here, this is something one of my supervisors said. They said, you're going to sit there with someone, you're going to have them talk, you're going to understand everything, but you can't push your morals on them because one, you don't know if it's good, and two, you can't make people be good. They're like, you may sit with someone who, no matter what, is going to go do evil things, no matter how much you understand them, right? No matter how much analysis they have, they will go do destructive things. It doesn't have to be evil, destructive things, and you can't stop it. I mean, one, you can't stop it legally. Like, what am I going to do? Unless it's something like they're minus, they say I have a plan to murder someone. There's laws. You can stop that, right? But if they're just like, I'm just going to sleep around casually and just use people up, I can't stop that, right? No matter how empathetic I can be, and no matter how much emotional presence there is, there's no guarantee that we can turn someone good, in air quotes. I can just help someone say something new so they can do something new, right? Because them sleeping around is the repetition compulsion to repeat this problem, and I'm trying to help them stop, right? So that's like the psychoanalytical route. That's kind of going far down that thing, right? Where the destructive empathy, and empathies continue to be being used because there's always thinking. Under destructive empathy, there's no more thinking, this ideology. There is no more person, right? You are a community at best. You're a piece of the community at best. You're hollowed out. And yeah, you have no thoughts. Every thought has you.
It's like being part of a cult.
It's even worse because it's like you're saying it's like being like someone being a part of a cult. There's not even a someone there anymore. There's no body there,
Mhm.
right? Like there's a person there, but there's no like. I think like, are you fully unconscious? You dead? What happens when you stop thinking?
Yeah. So Adam, just give me 1 quick second. You saw
That's
the lights go off.
yeah.
Sorry about that. Just
That's
give me
all
one
right.
sec. All right. Where were we?
We're talking about what happens when someone is hollowed out. So it's Orwell's idea, 1985, and the idea of soul murder.
Mhm.
Um, you know, maybe I should give the definition of soul murder. I know I did it the last one, but just for here, right?
Yeah, that would be good.
All right. So I'll give the technical definition first. So soul murder is it's not a diagnosis, right? It's not PTSD. It's a term for circumstances that eventuate in crime the deliberate attempt to eradicate or compromise the separate identity of another person. So the victim of soul murder remains in large part possessed by another, their soul in bondage to someone else. Brainwashing makes it possible to suppress what has happened and the terrible feelings evoked by their erased or discounted experiences. When it's necessary to retreat from feelings, good feelings as well as bad ones are compromised, and the victim's deepest feelings are invested primarily in the murderer. Therefore, murdering someone's soul deprives the victim of the ability to feel joy and love as a separate person. Yeah. Right. Orwell condensed that really well. Um, and in that moment.
Yeah,
Disorder. Right.
yeah.
So
So it's the idea of um, if somebody's being if somebody is traumatized and is hurting, it's the idea of not helping them recover and finding. Just give me 1 sec.
yeah.
So sorry about this, Adam.
No worse.
Sweet lady. She said she was cleaning the office, and then she went away, and all of a sudden, magically, the lights were on again because I just turned them on.
This doesn't ghost.
She's very sweet. She's very nice.
Yeah.
All right. So, soul murder. If I got this correctly from the last episode, it's the idea of if somebody's hurting, if somebody's traumatized, it's not allowing them to recover properly on their own or find the guide them along the proper healing path, let's say. But it's the idea of injecting through the trauma your own idea or ideology or way of thinking or whatever, which then nests in them, which becomes their new reality and which prevents them from healing or thinking for themselves, or it takes over their life. Would that be a correct summary of it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example that we can talk about that isn't going to get you deplatformed.
I appreciate that.
Let's see. Okay, let's think of a shoot. Okay, the example I have will get us in trouble. We could talk about that outside or out something else. But let's think of a mom and a kid, right? In soul murder. The mom has the baby and gives the baby no opportunity to develop as a person. It's just the mom projects into the baby all the mom's wants and needs and desires and hopes. And this is destructive and constructive hopes. It could be reasonable hopes, but it becomes like very destructive, right? It's tyranny, right? And this causes confusion within the baby, the child, and then they become an adult, right? Because we're children for a very short period of time, right? And that's one of the things about soul murder. One of the big things about soul murder is you're very confused and you have no ability to make any decisions because you're hollowed out. You are your mom at best, right? Or your dad, whichever one squeezed you out or never ever let you develop on that. And the identifying part with it is if you have a mom that's soul murder and soul murdering you, that is the crime. They're committing the crime against you. Say they beat the crap out of you, but they're also the only person that can soothe you. So you look for them for soothing. and that's a huge contradiction within a kid, right? My mom beats me, but she's the only one here to save me, right? And that's the soul murder part of it. Or that's another part of the soul murder, is that they're so bound with their perpetrator, because the perpetrator is the only one that they have, so they can't go on with life like whatsoever. There's no serious way to go on with life when you're bound to the person who destroys you. It's very difficult to get out of that binding. I don't know. Did that make sense? A little bit sense.
I think so. I think one of the ideas that came up while you were giving the definition was the idea of the stereotypical idea of parents wanting their kids to be successful, wanting them to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, and then doing everything they can to push that kid to take the road that will reach that end goal. Because that's also pressuring a kid to, it's putting your vision onto a kid that may not fit the kid at all. So this is a, well, I wouldn't call it light, but this is a bit of a oversimplification of the idea. But would you also classify that as soul murder?
No, because soul murder it's like criminal. It's like a criminal level, right? You could be an overbearing helicopter parent, right? It's when the person truly has no ability to fight back, right? Because in those situations, if you have someone that has enough ego, right, they can fight back. I think the soul murder is someone that is completely doesn't even understand that this was wrong, that they're being wronged. Right? It's just like someone who's an ideologue. They think they're right, and even though they're oppressors, they're being oppressed. They love their oppressors.
Right. So that's the Stockholm syndrome then that comes out of that.
It's like a Stockholm syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah. I understand why you're calling it a very heavy subject. Yeah, I'm gonna have to be careful with the examples here, but
I'll make a podcast and we'll bring it, and I don't mind getting in trouble. So we'll talk about it there. Don't worry. Don't ruin yours.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, but the important thing to realize here, at least, is the criminal element to it. So something is happening that is criminal to somebody who can't fight back, who doesn't have who is either naive or too young or not able to stand on their own. That person is being taken advantage of. Something is happening to that person, whether it's, for example, sexual abuse, whether it's raising in a very, let's call it narcissistic way, those kind of things. What it does on the victim, and that's the idea of overtaking their ability to think and to take action themselves. That concept is a soul murder part.
Yeah, and I'm using soul murder as in the end result, right? There are wounds along the way. You can have someone who's like, you could be bleeding, your soul could be bleeding, for instance, right, and not totally murdered. But the end part is you're hollow, right? That is the end part of soul murder. That's the goal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when you say you're hollow, you mean having no capacity to think for yourself anymore. You don't have ideas anymore because the ideas overtook you.
Yeah, and that's what Jung was talking about, right? He's the one who said that. That might have been the letter to Freud. I can't remember where he said that anymore. Carl Jung, but he said that, right? And that's what Freud was saying, that there's so many people so severely unconscious. He wanted to help people bring the unconscious to consciousness, right? He just saw that. He just saw ideology running people, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just this weird thing of, like, what happens, let's say, like, political activists, that's easy right now. Like, what happens when you confront a political activist, whatever side, and they only say tropes. They only say what BBC, Fox News, CNN, pick your side, all they can say is that, right? That's hollow. Like, that's a real person. There's skin, there's bones, there's a brain, but there's like nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or they've been killed off. Because what's the difference between that and the TV and what some billionaire is telling people to think? They can't think, right? Because what is it? Because I mean, I'm giving a little of my hand. I'm not a I am anti postmodern, right? I'm a modernist. You know, it's I think therefore I am. So if I'm not thinking, I am not.
This is actually a good. This is actually an interesting question I have for you, because if you combine the idea of the hollowness with the idea of empathy, so let me give you an example. I think at least I have the experience where I am quick to make an assumption about someone. And that's like stating the obvious because everybody does it all the time, making assumptions about people. But what can happen in, for example, political discussions or geopolitical discussions or climate discussions or whatever discussions you have, humanity, biology, whatever. There are certain things that will come forward. And when I hear that, that's like the, hearing the party lines that you just laid out. It's that hollowness that comes forward. It's those BBC headlines that come forward. The assumption then when I hear that, especially after asking a couple of questions about, just to see what's what, just to flesh it out a little bit, what are you talking about exactly? What do you mean when you're saying this? And pretty much it's just it's just the news articles that you're hearing. The assumption that I'm making then is, hold on a second. I see what's going on here. I see what the line of thinking is. I'm not talking to a person here. I'm talking to an ideology. I'm talking to a set of ideas that is outside of you. You didn't think of this. So in this case, it's me experiencing that. But if I take a step back from that, I do understand why that experience of, labeling the person, you are just all about this, that idea, why that comes forward.
Mm.
But at the same time, if we go back to the empathy part, it provides a real opportunity because you could ask questions like, a little bit hidden in like a compliment, something like along the lines of, it seems like you've really thought about this. Could you tell me more about this? Or like, hey, what do you think about this issue, about this specific element of what you're laying out, and how does that contrast with this other element? Something like that, something to just to test the waters a little bit, just to see what's up. Reconciling those is interesting because making an assumption about someone and then then just judging their whole character based on that assumption, although it does make sense, and it makes the more sense the more it happens with that specific person, to me it feels like falling into a trap as well. It's like closing off the door to opportunity, to possibility, because all of a sudden this person is just who you think this person is, which is this BBC newsline. How would you advise dealing with that? When is it justified to make an assumption about someone and to take that as the truth about who someone is? And when is it justified to ask more questions and to probe a little bit and to see what's what and to be empathetic towards the person just to see where they are coming from? How do you balance that in your opinion? Is it like an eternal struggle? Don't you ever stop doing both? Or are there moments where you would say, you've done enough work, you know how the person is now, this is it? How do you reconcile those two?
I had a couple of images in my mind. The first one is, can this person think? Because if this person can think and engage and contend, then there's at least a chance. You may never agree with each other, but at least there's a live person there with you, right? So I think then you can almost eternally deal with that, right? As long as there's engagement, right? If you're driving down the road and it's the protest, like whatever, the anti-oil protester, and they're just laying on the road, like stopping traffic, not time to talk, right? And if you talk to them, they have no desire to change their thought. They're sold on whatever idea it is, right? So you would never talk with them, and you just don't run them over, like just drive around, whatever. You do the best you can because we live in civilization, right? Am I answering your question? Tell me the question again, because my thoughts were going a couple places.
Yeah, that's fine. It's a very vague question I'm asking, so I'm trying to make it as specific as possible.
Oh.
What I'm basically aiming for is, you have on one side you have the empathy part, listening to people, probing people, seeing what's what, and checking out what someone is about. And you have the part of, I've heard enough. This is who you are. And how do you balance those? How do you make either decision which one is good?
I think it's my goal. This is going to be my goal. If let's say I had a meter and it's like beep beep beep, sold murder person, I'm not talking to them like in the street and engaging them, right? If they came to analysis, I would, right? And I think that's where we use the, say, constructive empathy branch, and then branching out to emotional presence and going down that psychoanalytical route. I think you actually revive a soul. 100% sure you can revive a soul, right? And have someone think. That's the whole point of, say, the command analyst will give you would be say anything or say everything. Matters on the flavor of the analyst, right? But to make the unconscious conscious, right? And to make the unconscious conscious is to think. It's to whatever's resonating within the soul, you feel it within the body. You feel in the body, it goes to the mind, and it goes to the mind, it becomes words, right? It's like this 4-step process. So there I would engage, because there's opportunity for someone to say something new. But elsewhere, there's nothing new, and they're just want to fight. Then then I don't know. I'm too tired to fight needlessly. Like, I'm lazy. Like, if there's no fruit, what's the point? I'll give up on strangers in that sense, right? Like, you could watch. I mean, like Charlie Kirk or like Ben Shapiro or Dr. Peterson, when he became famous in this clip, he was fighting people who weren't listening, right? They just wanted him to be wrong, right? Or they just want these guys to be wrong, and there's no like real engagement, or it's very rare, right? Right. But when the engagement happens, it's pretty amazing. Even if people disagree, then it's good, right? So I don't know. I think the people who are doing that are who does the Change My Minds episodes for years and years, Steven Crowder, right? Like, he's kind of answering your question. Like, who are the people who are you should talk to and shouldn't talk to? How they react.
It sounds like you laid your finger on something, and that something is intent. So you said two things. You said what you feel in your soul goes to your body, and from your body it goes to your mind, and if it's in your mind, it goes to words, and then you can bring those words out to to create a story, I suppose, with someone. The other thing that you said is, if you don't like to needlessly fight with someone, and you don't like to do that if it's not fruitful, and it's not fruitful if the person has no intention of collaborating with you or listening to you. You mentioned that Jordan Peterson campus video from 2016, I believe that was a bizarre video for multiple reasons. He was preaching, he was trying to give a story, and everybody around him was just, like you said, they wanted him to be wrong. They were not listening at all. That's super incredibly clear. But that's intent. If so, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer to the question then. So to the question, when do you decide to listen and to probe more, or to label the person like, I've heard enough? Maybe the answer is, it depends on what the intention of the other person is. Because if their intention is to work together and to listen, then you have ground to work on. If their intention is to just, give you the finger, tell you off, or not listening to you, or just make fun of you or whatever, then that will start like feeling like a needless fight really quickly.
Yeah. Let's bring this into unfortunately common tragedy. Divorce and breakups, right? When do you know you should divorce and break up with someone properly, right? Right. I
It's a
see.
good question.
Right, because I think this. I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna say it's Peril, right? If you have someone, let's say I have a client come to a session, not for couples. They were like, they just want to know, should I divorce my wife, right? Right. We'll go through everything that's happened. They say, they've cheated on me. The marriage is sexless. I've told them everything I wanted. We've gone to couple counselings a bunch of times. They never do the homework that the other counselor gave them. They never give me a kiss. They're very mean to me. They're very condescending. They can go down this like whole list. It's like you're like way deep into the tragedy of a bad marriage and probably leaving, right? Like it's kind of too. It's like almost too late in a sense to save the marriage, right? And it's tragic, right? I'm trying to use the most extreme, like a serial cheater, and they hit you, right? Done. Like,
Right.
no, that's an easy line to see, right?
Hmm.
So let's like bring it to something not so easy. They say like, hey, like I'm in this marriage and it's sexless, right? And say this is a woman saying this about their husband, right? Just flip it because that happens all the time and no one talks about that, oddly. Um, then she has to figure out what is my line, what it's, how do I respect myself, and when do I know he's genuinely or not genuinely trying to be here? Because maybe she'll say everything that she wants and he can say, oh, I'll totally do them, but then he doesn't, right? How long does she give? 3 months, a year, until the kids turn 18? Like what, right? So then she has to look at his intent, right? And his intent isn't his words, it's his actions.
Right.
If he still doesn't have sex with her, if he doesn't, there's no freaking foreplay, and foreplay is like slapping an ass and giving kisses and giving hugs and fun. There's no fun, right? Intimate fun. Then she knows he's a liar, right? That's what comes down to it. His intent is to lie, maybe to keep just because he doesn't want the inconvenience of a divorce. He doesn't want to pay alimony, whatever. He doesn't want the image of a happy couple, broken, whatever it is, right? So then his intent is destructive at minimum.
Hmm.
So then, hate to say it, because it's tragic, but then maybe that's divorce. That's a reason for divorce. If someone is abusing you and has no intent and shows no intent to ever treat you like a person, but to treat you as a commodity. We're not commodities, because you treat someone like a commodity, you're treating them like a slave. And we're not supposed to be someone's slave to be used up.
Agreed. Intent is really important. So in the example that you laid out, it wouldn't. That's not a good situation. So for someone in that situation, so let's make this a real example.
Okay.
If that's possible for you, if it's possible and allowed for you at least. If this woman deals with that, and the intention, and she analyzed what the man's action is, right? The man is fooling around with other women. The man is not giving her any not giving her any attention. So his actions are not aligned with what he's saying, with what he's promising her, which clearly shows there's a mismatch in his actions and his words. So his intent is not good. It's not aimed at the highest good. He's lying. Should the woman in this case give up, or is there an application to use, well, empathy or something else in order to align with that person and bring it back to the right track? Or are they too far gone?
I'm with do everything to bring it back to the right track, right? But there is some line. That's what I'm asking. Where's the line of you tried enough, right? She's, like I said, brought her to couples. She's she talks and talks to him and tries to do other things, goes to retreats, like couples retreats, to try to save the marriage, and nothing changes, right? To say, like, on and honest, right? I'm not talking about the people who are like, oh, I'm not happy, so like I'm gonna like get a divorce, and it's like nonchalant, right? That's a psychopath at that point, right? We're talking about an honest person, a real honest person who does not want to get divorced, but is put up against his corner by being so dehumanized in their marriage, right? Because the person also, when I'm working with someone like that, I always ask them, what's the point of marriage, right? And they'll answer this question. It takes a long time because it's such a weird question. People get married and don't even know the point, or haven't like thought it through. Then they haven't thought it through. And they never made a plan with who their spouse is, which is the other tragedy, or another part of this tragedy. Yeah. Side note. But yeah, you do anything to save a marriage, but the other person doesn't want to. Then there's nothing you can do. There's no way. There's no way to save a marriage if someone else doesn't want to. 0% chance, right? You try and you suffer, right? And that may be a year, 2 years of trying, but then you give yourself a line of, I did everything reasonable, other than put a gun to their head. And that's not reasonable. That's tyranny. So I have to go do what I have to do, and this is going to be major suffering and not what I want. But why should I continue to be beaten? Why is that virtuous to continue to be beaten, right? Or abused in some way? And like I said, sexless marriage is abusive, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not something you do nonchalant. That's a long time thinking and a long time suffering to even decide that that's what it is. That you had to break up with someone or divorce.
What you're aiming at is also the idea that people have a hard time changing themselves, let alone changing another person. And the other, yeah, like you said, has a 0% chance. And the other idea that came to mind is, I believe it's with asocial kids, right? That when I believe the example that was given was kids that bite. So apparently, and I think Andrew Huberman was the one that said this, biting that you do for food, because you're consuming food, uses a different part of the brain than biting a human. You know, biting to do harm. So there is literally a different part of your brain that's being programmed to bite aggressively. It's not the same mechanism. The fact that you're moving your jaw up and down doesn't matter. It's a different part of your brain doing it. So kids that are 2 years old and they bite, the parents should do something about that. If they're 3 years old, they should be worried. They should really do whatever they can to stop the kid from biting as soon as possible. If they are 4 years old, there's pretty much 0% chance that it's going to stop. This kid is destined to become aggressive, criminal, that kind of person. And I've heard for asocial and criminal people that have that kind of background, it's incredibly hard, even for the best psychologists and the best psychoanalysts, so the best doctors in general. It's very hard to turn them around, to put them back to the correct track, which underlines the idea that it's very hard to change other people. So if there is no intention to change yourself, back to the example with that woman, it definitely sounds like there's a 0% chance that she will change her husband if the intent is not there. I think these sound like the same mechanism, like the same thing happening.
Yeah. No, we can't change our spouse. Like in this situation, she can't change her husband. She can give her husband the opportunity to change. That's what we can do. We can give people opportunity to change, but we can't change them. Right? We give them the space, but we don't put a gun to the back of their head and say, this is what you do. Right? We don't do that, because that's not changing someone. Right? That's force. But again, it goes back to when you were talking about, when you're saying that, I was thinking, what's kind of what's the aim? Because if I work with someone, and let's say I work with an evil person, work with like evil people, I'm not trying to change them, right? I'm there, so I'm using the empathy to understand and building a relationship with them, and the relationship is very difficult to sit with. It's hard to sit with like evil. I don't like it. It's like meeting malevolence over and over again. Like it's not great. But the goal isn't to change them, because that would be an error on my part as an analyst to try to make them good. Like, I can't make them good. I could just make them say more, right? And I can have the background hope of like they stop this crap, right? And I'm saying evil as in not criminal evil, right? And they were actually doing something criminal. I have to report it, right? It's something serious, but evil nonetheless.
So what do you mean when you say evil? And so, okay, so a couple of questions here. What do you mean exactly when you say evil, especially non-criminal evil? So you laid this out earlier. If somebody comes to you and says like, "Hey, it's my plan to murder someone," then the intention is clearly there. You're threatening a person, and you, as the counselor, let's say, you are aware of that, and then there's laws in place you mentioned earlier, and you can do whatever you can to stop that.
Yeah.
So that's criminal evil. But what do you mean by non-criminal evil? And the second question is, if your aim is not to stop that, what is your aim? What is your empathy aimed at?
Okay. I'll give you an example. Let's say a man is he's sexually abused by a woman, right? He can't get any help. So what he does is get revenge on women, right? He becomes part of whatever community, and say he's handsome enough, rich enough, he figures it out, right? And his goal is, I'm gonna get revenge on all women. I live in a very liberal place with a lot of with a lot of liberal women, feminist women. So sex is easy to get because I have the car and I have the money, and it's really easy, and they're chasing my car, my money. They get into that whole scene at the clubs or whatever, and they just sleep with woman after woman after woman, and just kicks them out after, and just there's this revenge on their sexual assaulter in their mind, right? And that's the repetition compulsion. They're trying to heal this sexual assault, but they're doing it in a destructive and evil way by destroying these other people, right? And destroying themselves. They come into analysis and they say that this is what they're doing. I'm not trying to stop their behavior. Their behavior is a symptom, right? I'm trying to get to the core conflict. Psychoanalysis core conflict. The better word is just disease. I don't know why we just don't use the word disease, right? I'm trying to get to the disease of what is this about, right? Okay, it's about the sexual assault, right? And then we really start digging down into the sexual assault. How it happened, it's not exactly what we get into. It's not about the details, right? But someone may say I was very naive, right? They may take the personality test, the big five, and say I'm low in neuroticism. One of the problems is that being real low in neuroticism, I was very naive, right? And I got myself in a bad situation, right? And we have someone build their narrative there so that, one, it never happens to them again, and then two, their impulse isn't revenge. We turn their aim towards something good, but they have to choose it. I give them all the space in the world to be angry and talk about how all women are just gold diggers, because technically that's all he's going after. So it's technically true. I'm not going to say, oh no, well, 3% of blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to bring in reality, right? It's not to argue. Even if he's wrong, it's not to argue, right? I'm not there to be right. I'm there for him to just struggle, have a space to struggle and scream in the most uncivilized way. So he has the opportunity to choose better, or he could die being a player. That's his other choice too, and never fix it. What I can do is be there, exist, emotional presence, be a container, just containing his feelings, which I'm not going to like, but that's okay. I'm not supposed to like it all the time. That's kind of the point. And just give people the opportunity to say things that they're not allowed to say in civilization, so they can have the ability to choose something different. And something different doesn't mean morally good. It may be something different, like he marries someone and then has side pieces all the time. And that's not what I want personally, but I can't stop him from doing that. And maybe someone can argue that's a little bit better. He ruins one woman and a few mistresses instead of one woman a day, right? Maybe that's better for society, but I don't know. I mean, that's a weird argument, but yeah, I'm not there to make someone good. Um, I hope it, and I will ask leading questions towards it. I can't help it, right? I will ask like, well, what happens when you sleep with 600 women, right? That's there to reflect on: is this any good, right? Helping them build their moral. I'm not to be their moral or their super ego, right? I'm not. I'm not your dad. I'm not your boss. I'm not your tyrant, right? So analysts we're not there to be tyrants. We're there to make humans, and humans are filthy. We're good and filthy, right? And but the whole system is to make people do less destructive things. It is aimed towards that. It's not free. It's not totally neutral. That would be a lie. Um, but we stay neutral for a long time. Like my analyst was neutral for a long time, and at some point she started directing. She started saying like, "That's stupid. Don't do that." Fair enough. Like, okay, right? It does develop, but that's kind of how it is. Did I answer the question? I feel like I kind of tangent for a second.
No, I think you did. So my question was, if it's not at solve, if the goal of your empathy is not to solve, but to provide an environment of emotional presence, so that that person is able to fully explore their ideas with guidance by you whenever that is appropriate. You might, you might aim your torch at a specific angle, at a specific place, just so they are able to explore that. Hence the directing, not the directing, but you use the word guiding. Hence the guiding that you let them do, to that hopefully will lead to better understanding and for them to make better decisions. But they have to find it themselves. So I think if I'm paraphrasing you right now, so correct me if what I'm saying is wrong, but the question, what is the goal of your empathy in a session, is not to solve it, but it's to guide the person to find the solution themselves. And hopefully that will lead to a better outcome for them and the people he's hurting.
Yeah. And when they find that aim, I am severely on their side for it. My bias will come out. I am on their side. Right? So the example of the guy, I'm not going to be on the side of him just running through women, right? But I'm not going to tell him to stop. I'll ask, like, what would it be like to stop? What happened? What would it be like to be with 3,000 women? How about 5,000 women, right? Like, just go to the end of it, right? The moment he decides to stop and he explains why, and it's not because, he's worried I'm going to kick him out because I think lowering him or something like that. We deal with the transference, but he decides I'm going to do this for myself because of these things. I want to have kids and a family, and I don't want to hurt people anymore, and I'm hurting myself, whatever. Then I'm on that side of that. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. Right? That's the rising out of hell, right? Going into hell is sitting with someone doing all the destructive stuff, right? That's Virgil and Dante going through all the levels of hell. Then once they decide here's the aim, we're down all the way at the bottom, right? I needed to see the worst of the worst, and they kind of needed to see the worst of the worst with me too, because it's a little bit of a relationship. I think that's part of the emotional presence is they see I can make mistakes too, and they don't kill me and I don't kill them for mistakes, right? That's part of the relationship of the emotional presence. And then we work our way up from hell to limbo and paradise, right? So my aim is their good aim, their constructive aim, good constructive aim.
So your aim is that mechanism of empathy that they are using and they are deploying, but towards a higher good instead of a higher bad.
Yes.
Or lower bad, actually.
Yeah, I'm on the side of the life drive, not the death drive.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it's just I'm not doing it in the same way a like preacher or let's say a preacher would do it. A preacher has a very specific doctrine and its rules, and it makes sense, and it's like easier in some sense, right? Like everything's kind of laid out. I'm doing it in a non-laid out way. This is why this may change the topic a little bit, but I have a lot of trust in analysts who are philosophy based more than like just MD or just therapy based, right? Because they know how to think. Those are who are more like students of philosophy. Like, I mean, I don't say like Freud. I mean, like everyone who's ever been important in history. They actually know how to think and think through terrible situations, right? That's why I think in the first podcast I said I don't really like therapists and social workers and psychotherapists and psychoanalysts. I have a distrust of them if they've only ever gone through just traditional training at some university, right? But Freud lays that out in the name of the paper is like the argument for the lay analyst. It's not exactly that, but the lay analyst, where he is very much you don't have to be an MD to be an analyst. You want someone who knows literature and philosophy, right? To think, because if you're able to think, you can help someone else think. If you can't think, all you can do is propel your ideology onto someone else. So then therapists just become soul murderers, and we're seeing that today in the Western world. Therapists and doctors are murdering people. They're hollowing them out and giving them an ideology, saying this is who you are.
Yeah. You gave an example in the last in the last episode that we did. The example of, I believe it was a psychoanalyst that you mentioned, that got a comment from a woman like, "Hey, I don't know, my husband is a scumbag," something like that, and then the reaction was, "Yeah, you should leave him."
Yeah, that's the ideology of hate, misandry, right? The hate of men. Right.
Just a quick clarification. When you say MD, what do you mean?
Like a medical doctor. The back in
right.
Because this is like late 1800s, early 1900s. They were saying, analysts can only be MDs, but Freud wanted women to be MDs, and like in Germany, I think a woman could become an MD until 1900, right? And right. So it was this era of time. So he was fighting, and he was fighting for that. He was also protecting his daughter because she got a MD in the 70s, but she was practicing in the 20s at least because she was born in 1895 or so. Anna Freud, right? So he was protecting analysis and his daughter from the medicalizing of it. He was also protecting an analysis from America because in Strachey, there's a whole problem with how psychoanalysis was medicalized in English and in Americas, and how he was severely angry about that, rightfully angry.
Okay. Right. So I'm interested I'm interested where the line is. So you're saying you have a natural distrust of medical doctors, psychoanalysts, social workers, that whole group of people, if they are just traditionally trained on, for example, university, instead of being philosophy based. So I would like to break those down with you, and I would like to see where those two sides are exactly.
Yeah.
So let me start with a question, because when you train to become a psychoanalyst, I think you start out as a psychiatrist, although I might have that reversed. So correct me if I'm wrong. But don't you also? I believe the Freudian school is pretty much applied within traditional training, right? So that would mean that there is a philosophical basis within the traditional training. Or have I got that wrong?
Oh, I mean, to train to be an analyst, you're gonna have to know every myth ever Freud ever talked about and never talked about, right? Because myth are stories, and these myths that are stories are talking about human nature. That's why he used. I mean, he used Psyche and Amor. He talked about Cupid. He talked about the Oedipus and Echo, which is very popular. I mean, that's all he talked about, right?
Right.
Because he wasn't trying to make psychoanalysis a science of like rats, right? He I forgot. There's these two terms. There's this good book called Freud and Man's Soul by Bruno Bettelheim that knocks all this stuff out in a way that I can't even talk about it properly. All right. But my distrust is if that's all you've ever learned, it's just what you learned for 2 years at a master's at some university, but you don't have the actual meaning of a liberal arts education, as in you've never read anything and understood Socrates, Plato, Shakespeare. I don't care. Take your pick. If you really haven't contended with all those things, how are you truly useful to someone? If you haven't contended with religion, how can you be useful to someone? Truly useful beyond just repeating the ideas that your professor said. Right? You're not a thinker. You're not even like, let's say that you're too unconscious, right? And that's what I see way too often. It's just therapists, social workers, psychoanalysts are political activists, not analysts, right? And I'm just
by themselves or because their training steered them that way?
Things the training steered them that way. That's how I've seen the training go. It's very sad. Because it's anti-psychoanalytical. Psychoanalysts are supposed to say anything and everything, and think everything and everything, but that's not allowed in institutions. You're not allowed to praise Trump, or you're not allowed to say something negative about Trump. But once you put those boundaries, then we're not thinking no more, right? For instance. Same thing. Whatever the topic is, if you're not allowed to criticize or praise it, there's no longer thinking. So, and if you haven't gone through those thinking and you don't know why you believe something, you can't help someone understand why they believe something. You're not going to. You're fraud.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for somebody who would be interested, so a very practical question for somebody who would be interested in becoming a psychoanalyst, a good one. And who would, need to do their masters. So they would need to go to that university for 2 years, like you mentioned. But then they are just traditionally trained. What are the proper steps that they can take? Is it just order the black books from Jung, a couple of books from Freud, and call it a day? What would the proper steps be?
Let's read everything, right? Like, the hell with TikTok and distractions. And if you want to be a master at this, if you want to be a master at this, read everything. Read all of Freud. Shoot, like, I've been trying to learn German to read Freud in the proper German because I know the English is messed up, right? That's the heck of investment because I'm really bad at learning German, right? That's why I have Freud and Man's Soul to help with it. Get the training, because you have to get the training to get the licensing, and do what you have to do to survive and make money and do that. It's not worthless, right? I'm not anti-psychology or social work in that sense. It's necessary and needed, right? Do what you got to do, right? But it's up to... I'll ask it in a question. Why are you depending on 2 years at a university to make you a master at helping people do everything up to not destroy themselves and other people? How do you think you can do that in 2 years, just because in 2 years by other people telling you? It's not. We can spend 700 years reading Socrates and Plato and not reach that, right? It's not to be perfect or amazing, it's to be better and thoughtful, right? This is why when I teach
Right.
students or coaches, I'm like, hey, in the very beginning, read as much as you can, struggle with it, don't expect to know, because I just want you to stumble towards better. Just stumble towards better, bleeding and all. Just stumble towards better, right? And then work with people that you've gone through that hell already before you try to take on things you've never dealt with, right? If someone's gone through a divorce, work with people who are going through a divorce or going through a divorce, thinking through a divorce, or trying to heal from a divorce because you know it. That's your hell too, right? And figure it out, right? And then maybe you'll see something, you'll hear something, and you think, "Oh my gosh, you know, didn't Kant say something about this? Francis Bacon say something about this? And how do I understand truth?" Right? That's a big one. How do you understand truth? Are you a modernist, or you're postmodernist, or you're pre-modernist? You better pick that one.
I like the idea. We mentioned this a little bit before. I think also in the previous episode, we were talking about the big 5 personality traits. And I believe my question was, well, I don't even remember what my question was exactly, but one of the things that you said is in order to be a psychoanalyst, you have to be naturally very open. You have to score very high in openness, which makes perfect sense because you're there in empathy with a person, listening to the person and absorbing their experience and experiencing it as your own so that you can participate with them in that exploration towards a solution, hopefully. So that means that you are very open. So high openness generally, I think, also is people who are very open are very curious, which aligns with what you said. Read everything that you can. Read Plato, read Socrates, read Jung, read Freud, read all these people from the past. And not just read them and go through them, but try to understand them, try to think about it, try to parse it and to make sense of it, and to ask questions and to engage with people and to spar with people about the ideas and just to become better. It's literally building a skill. So as far as you're laying it out right now, it's nothing else than building any other skill, whether it's martial arts or swimming or running, or if you want to be good at something, you have to practice it a lot. You have to be incredibly interested in it because that drives you, right? Two things. Let people do something, and that is either fear because something bad might happen if you don't do it, or drive, because you're seeing a vision where that makes you excited. And if you have to drive to understand people, then it will be very easy to delve into all these books and to talk with people and to engage with people and to learn from them and to have beautiful conversations, and be humble in every single one of them, so you can learn from every single person that you interact with. I think that's what you're describing.
Yeah, it's
a skill.
It's a skill and an art. It's like, hey, you want to be a master chef? You better go to every country and every province and learn from the local master, every spice and everything, because it's a skill, because there are direct skills. You better learn how to cut and temperature and all that, but it's also an art because some of the taste is subjective, right? It's both, right? But you better go everywhere. And you can never go everywhere and learn everything, right? But you can always do more and become more of a master at being a chef, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, this is going back to that whole thing where we started with the whole empathy thing, and especially So I'm a really big fan of those techniques that Chris Voss taught. The technical empathy that I told you about. So mirroring, we already went through that mirroring. Repeating the last 3 words, and labeling. That's starting a sentence with "it sounds like," "it looks like," "it feels like." There's a couple of other ones. For example, no-oriented questions. So not getting somebody as a salesperson, not getting somebody in a rhythm of saying yes. Do you want your gas price to go down? Do you want to spend less money? Which prompts you from saying yes. And then the idea is, at the last question, where I'm asking you the question, okay, do you want to sign this contract? Your answer will probably be yes.
Yeah.
He flips it around and he makes it no-oriented questions. And the idea there is, and actually I'm curious what your take on that is. Let me know what you think about that. The idea of no-oriented questions is to prompt a no, because a no makes people feel safe. if I ask you a question that prompts you to say yes, like, "Hey, Adam, you want to have a lower gas price, right? So you want to pay less money for your gas every month, something like that." That will, you know, you're gonna sniff that something is up. You know where this conversation is gonna go. Your defenses are gonna go up very likely. Might not, you might not pick up on it, but if I do it 5 times in a row, you'll probably pick up on it. So yes makes people potentially feel pressured, manipulated, driven into a corner, that kind of stuff. And on top of that, even if you do get a yes, is it a real yes? Right? Is it not a counterfeit yes? You might just give me a yes just so I hang up the phone and then you'll just ignore me forever, right? That's not a yes at all. You said the word, but the intent was not there. Stuff like that. So yes, it's not really that valuable. A no, on the other hand, allowing a person to say no, is allowing a person to be comfortable setting up the limits. Setting their... It's allowing a person to make a decision and have autonomy about what's happening, right? They have the freedom to say no, and no makes people feel safe. Because then they, if the answer is no, well, then you can follow up with, for example, a label. It feels like there's something in the way that we can work on, something like that. Then you can do your exploration. Then you can see what's up. This is a kind of a side question, but what do you think about the no-oriented question? Is that how do you look at that from a strictly psychoanalytical viewpoint?
Oh, I mean, someone has to have the capacity to say no, so they have enough of there's enough of a me, because to say no, there has to be me, like a me, an I. To make someone feel safe? I don't know if it makes someone feel safe. Maybe they don't. What if a person doesn't trust themselves and they say no, and then they're paranoid about the no, and then in a sales pitch, maybe they're missing out, and then the no forces a yes, but it's through like a pathological, this kind of pathology. That's manipulation at that point. That's like that's getting around defenses in a useful or messed up way, right? Because
right.
I mean, I could trick someone into giving me information, but I don't know if it's useful, right? I used to take a lot of Ubers, and if I asked someone, "Oh, how's Uber treating you?" they'd be like, it's all right. It's kind of tough, in the city, da 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 da, right? But if I make up a lie, and I'd be like, "Oh, I heard like Uber was, gonna cut the rates and all this stuff." They're like, "What? Where did you hear that?" I'm like, "Oh, I saw that." And then they'd be like, "Oh," and they'll tell me personal stories about people screwing them over and all these things that they wouldn't tell if I just asked them a question, right? Like, yeah, we could manipulate people into talking about things they wouldn't. That's what sounds like this idea of the no question is kind of that manipulation to try to get something out of someone.
I had to ask myself that same question. Because once again, I've read this book of his quite a while ago by now. It must have been, I think it came out in 2018, and I read it shortly after. Some of these techniques I'm using literally on a daily basis. And if you go back through all my podcasts, you will probably hear me say, stuff like it feels like, it looks like, it sounds like a lot. The question that I asked myself this a couple of times a while back, like, okay, is this manipulation? Are you just tricking people into saying something? What are you doing? And those are very legitimate questions. Because, yeah, they can definitely be used for manipulation. They can definitely be used for malicious things. And they probably are. I'm quite sure they are, 100%. But that's where the intent comes forward again, right? Because, okay, so, and the same goes for you, I think. But in my line of work, as a project manager, I deal with all sorts of different people in all sorts of lines of work with all sorts of demands and all sorts of ideas. Operational people, board of directors, managers, clients, everybody you could think of, and they have all sorts of different personality traits. They can be the sweetest they can be naive, they can be the sweetest people around, they can be people that are very agreeable or very low and or very disagreeable. They can be narcissistic, they can be the kind of person that takes credit for somebody else's work. You have all sorts of different people, and that goes pretty much for life because you have it all the time everywhere. What I'm using those techniques for is to make sure that I can level with everybody in a way that is productive. So my aim in this case, and this is actually something I experienced a while back, is that I was dealing with somebody who was quite narcissistic and who was taking credit for other people's work, which is, to me personally, it's one of the most frustrating personalities to deal with. It's just the complete opposite of humility, right? It's the whole idea of kissing up and kicking down. I don't do well with that kind of person generally. But so I had a conversation with somebody I trust, somebody who is very, very successful in the Netherlands, a very big business person, has been I think even be a mayor at a couple of different cities here, all sorts of board of director functions. This person has been in their line of food for a long time, for 30, 40 years or something like that. And I outlined the situation to that person because I was dealing with that. I was struggling with that. Because in this case, it was my work that was being taken credit for by people who are very important, who were very influential. So that was kind of a tricky situation. How do I deal with that? Ask him a question. What does the success of this project mean for you personally? And how important is it that this project completes successfully? Or another way of asking that would be, what is the risk for you personally if this project fails? That's the negative question. That's the loss aversion version of the question. I asked that question to that person. It was a great question. I asked the question to that person. In my specific situation, so maybe I would like to hear what you think on this. In that specific situation, it was a misfire. And because the person asked me, the person gave the answer okay, this is a very academic question. It is not relevant for the situation. Period. I don't think anything came after that at all. I think that was literally it. Hey, what kind of an academic question is this? Let's just move on with the actual work, shall we? Something like that. So for something very dismissive like that. But I still feel my gut feeling still tells me that is the proper question to ask.
You ask the right question to a person who doesn't give a shit, so you're not going to get anything back. It's like the wife telling the husband all the right things to do, and he doesn't care. You can do all the right things, doesn't mean you'll get that.
Right.
You won't get the outcome, right? I mean,
right.
When you said that, this would be inappropriate for work, but the question I had in mind to ask him would have been, what's going to happen if you keep lying your way to success, right? I was going to point out the fraudulent side of it.
But you were going to put your actual finger on it.
Right, but you can't, that's like inappropriate, right, for those kind of positions, mostly, right? That's kind of the luxury I have if I've worked with someone long enough. You can hit someone's ego at some point, right, and say something like that. Yeah, I mean, you're going up against is that a grandiose or a vulnerable narcissist, right? Well, you're going up against a narcissist that probably is incompetent, so they're doing it. So in the way they answered you, gave you some data, they ignored it, right? So they're a runner. They're a coward.
Right.
All right. So then you had to decide, do I want to deal with cowards on my team? And what do I do about having a coward on my team? And what is my boss doing, or whoever? Can someone do something about this coward?
Yeah, but then it goes back to the idea: is this just to manipulate a a conversation? And I think the answer to that is no. Because these techniques, at least in my specific situation, they are aimed not to manipulate a specific outcome. They are aimed at understanding where the person is coming from, and by doing that, building rapport with the person that then allows collaboration to happen. So let's say, I don't know, you are a manager of a team, right? And you want one of your employees to do something, and an employee keeps giving you resistance, right? For whatever reason, they're not clear about it. They're just not doing it. They're either ignoring you or throwing it back in your face. Whatever. It doesn't really matter. They're giving you resistance. Well, one of your reactions could be, okay, if you don't want to do it, you can just go away. You're fired. In the Netherlands, it might be a bit harder because of employee protection rules, but for argument's sake, that might be a reaction. If I would be in the situation as the manager, what I would do is ask those questions then, and that's not to manipulate. That's uncovering what's up, right? So I would ask something like, "Hey, it seems like something is really bothering you. Would it be okay to discuss that at some point in the future, or either now? Something like that." And that's especially that part. It seems like something is bothering you, because that's not accusatory. It's not, "Hey, dude, something is literally bothering you. I can see it." Because then I'm making an assumption. I'm projecting an assumption. It's like a statement. It's my personal experience. It seems to me. Might be wrong. If it's wrong, tell me, please. And then I can say, "Oh, okay, yeah, it just seemed to me like that." But I'm glad to accept that it's something else that's going on here. But it's just a statement that allows them to either, if that statement is correct, it allows them to say, "Yeah, something is wrong. Something is bothering me." Okay, well, sounds like you know that something is bothering you, so is there something I can do to help? Right? Or is it something that you want to talk about? Do you need a second pair of eyes to look at something? Do you need a second pair of ears to listen to something? Right? And those questions then lead you towards collaborating, towards like in your words, it doesn't outline the solution to them. Because I believe that people need to be the owner of their own ideas, right? People believe in ideas if they believe it comes from them. So help them go towards that idea. That's that solution. It's like a collaboration. Okay, let me stop with this context. With that context in mind, do you still feel that is manipulative? How do you feel about that?
Well, actually, I should have said this earlier. I'm not anti-manipulation as long as it's getting relevant data, right? But in your example, you're assuming that this problematic employee is going to be cooperative with you, right? Because if I dig into my disagreeable nature, and you were my boss, and you came to me and said, "It looks like you're struggling with something." How did
it sounds like something is bothering you, or it looks like something is bothering you,
right? I'd be like, "Are you calling me stupid?" I would immediately just take it as an insult to my competency, right? If I am like that person you have to deal with, right? Because my competency, I know I'm not competent, right? So then I'll push that on you. So I think that manipulation would fail at that point. Yeah.
Right, but that's a data point. If that's the reaction.
Well, and then they probably should get fired or something like that, right? It's information, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's a data point. You get information no matter what, right? And then you learn, oh, this person's disagreeable. They can't take accountability. Do I want someone in my team that doesn't know how to take accountability? Because if they don't, these things just get more destructive and I'll lose good people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you make a decision, right? So, I mean, either way, it's good information. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It really depends. So you said earlier, like when I asked you the question, like, what does it take to become a good psychoanalyst? You said it's not just a skill, it's an art. You have to keep learning at it. You have to keep learning it. You have to keep practicing it. And the same goes with this. There are misfires, and the misfire that I laid out earlier is a very good example of that. But in general, I would say that in terms of communication, it has done me personally and also the people around me, I think, a lot of good, because back to that original statement, of empathy and understanding where the person is coming from. This allowed me to better understand where people are coming from by not. It's basically a mechanism not just to ask questions and to get information, but it's also a mechanism to stop myself from making assumptions, even though you don't fully eliminate it, as you just pointed out, because I still made the assumption that collaboration is a possibility, and that's completely fair. That's a completely fair statement. But it does stop me from making the assumption, this is just what the person is. I'm not even going to ask questions anymore. Whatever idea I have in my mind about that person is exactly that. Yeah, so it's an information gathering mechanism. It's a assumption stopping mechanism. It's a collaboration mechanism. If properly used, all aimed at the higher good. Although I do agree with you, they can definitely be used maliciously as well, I think. And they probably are. They very likely are, like with everything.
I mean, this is kind of making me think, like, you better be careful of the company you keep, right? Because then you don't have to worry too much about manipulation and all this kind of stuff. You just talk honestly. Because this is exhausting to know how to manage people and have to, like, jump around someone's psyche so much.
Yeah.
Like, we have to, right? But, like, in the broader picture, like, how freaking, like, sometimes I think, like, it was dumb to get into this field because that's all I do, right? Like, I'm going into the hell of other people and coming out. It's like, that's a lot, right? It might have been easier to go be a plumber, and then read Socrates or listen to Socrates while I'm fixing the pipe, like, it might have been easier, right? Because here's another thing. I mean, I'm saying this all to say is, like, to be an analyst, you better learn how to suffer well. If you don't know how to suffer well, you'll never be an analyst. And that's analyst, that's therapist, that's doctor, that's pastor, that's parent, that's spouse. I mean, I think that's, so it's not special to being an analyst. I think that's to being an other to someone else. You better learn how to suffer real well with them, and with yourself. And
for everybody who's watching and listening right now, could you define what you mean by suffer well?
Okay, so let's take the opposite for a second. It's easy to celebrate well with someone, right? When things are going really well, you're buying houses, you're popping champagne, there's celebration, right? Things are going well. To suffer well is regardless of, say you lose everything. Let's say husband and wife. Let's take husband and wife. Husband and wife, they have everything. They're millionaires, right? Say they lose everything. Stock market crashes. There's a war, whatever. They don't leave each other because of the worse, right? That's the vows of the better for worse, no matter what. To suffer well means my spouse is not optional, and no matter what happens, I'm going to stick with them until one of us dies, because you can't stick with someone who's dead, right? You don't bury yourself with your spouse, right? So you suffer well means when these bad things happen, you can complain, you can talk about it in some sense, right? Because you can say, "Oh, I miss our Ferrari" or whatever, right? But you don't take it out on each other, and you learn how to rebuild it, because you built it once, you built it again, right? Every nonsense loss, you can get back, right? That's to suffer well with someone. Sometimes it's taking up the mantle of not 50-50. Sometimes it can't be 50-50. Someone might just be sick, and you have to take up 80% of everything for a year or two. And then you suffered well with them, and then they better fucking, sorry, I didn't hurt. They better, when they're healed, they better not pay you back, but celebrate well with you, right? Like, we made it. Now let's go do some good things, and thank you for not abandoning me, right? Because it would have been easier for you to abandon me. That's in the vows. The it's not the for better part that everyone loves. It's the for worse part. You suffer well. I gotta find that. I'm gonna have to write down a real specific definition for that. I haven't done that yet.
Through good times and through bad times.
Well, through the bad times is what people are focused. I don't want even people to think about good times at some point. Like, how do you suffer well through bad times? That's life, because they're inevitable, right? Even if you do everything right, it's inevitable. Can't get away from it.
What was the saying? The moment that travesty happens, that's the moment you see what somebody's really made of.
Yeah.
Or how strong somebody believes in their convictions, something along those lines.
Yeah.
I'm probably butchering that, but yeah.
So yeah. You don't know someone until they're tested. Right. Makes sense.
All right. I'm gonna make a bit of a jump here to a different topic because I know that you have around 20 minutes left. So let's move to one final question. See what leads from that. This one is actually interesting because I spoke to our mutual friend Wyatt Chabanik recently again. Somebody who you've also spoke to, I believe, recently. And what we talked about was the school of Jung and the school of Freud. And what he laid out in that conversation, which should by now come out tomorrow, he said that the school of Jung generally has been dismissed within the I believe he said within the psychological field in general, which has focused on Freud mostly. Do you know, because we were struggling a little bit to find an answer why that is, why there's this focus on Freud while Jung was apparently dismissed. At the same time, I'm hearing Jung's name everywhere all the time, so I'm not sure in how far he is dismissed, if he is at all. But anyway, maybe you could shed some light on that. Was Jung indeed dismissed? Maybe if we discuss, for example, the traditional training at the university, the 2-year masters that we just discussed like an hour ago. Do those also introduce the ideas from Jung or just from Freud? And if he was dismissed, why so?
Historically, Jung got in trouble with Sabina because he had supposedly had an inappropriate affair with Sabina, so one of the women analysts. So in life, he got in trouble, but he's an interesting person. That's every interesting person gets in trouble, but that wasn't great. In the Americas, okay, North America, it's Freud focused, but it's Strachey. He's the translator from German to English. It's medicalized Freud focus, so it's not even Freud focus. It's a soulless analysis that is alive in America and not popular. There's only one accredited school in the United States that you can get like a master's and a PhD that's accredited in psychoanalysis, and that's in modern psychoanalysis, right? So it's actually a step away from Freud, a couple, like 4 generations away from Freud. So Freud is barely popular. Jung is not popular at all. Jung is kind of like a sideshow. Like, oh, you know about Jung? Like, that's cool. Even in my training, we didn't talk about Jung. We were Freudians. Well, we're post-Freudians, right? Things that people said past Freud. South America, Jung is more alive, and Freud is more alive in a more honest way. So you speak to someone who's like a Spanish-speaking analyst or South American analyst, it's much more alive. Also, just kind of, it makes more sense with the culture. American culture doesn't like what Jung is saying. Too much mythology. Freud's too much mythology. Jung is way too much mythology, right? Like, people have a problem saying soul. So yeah, I mean, the feeling is right. Jung isn't taught at all. When Freud is taught, he's crazy. That's it. That's what psychoanalysis is in the States that I could speak of.
Who are current? So if you would open like a modern training book right now, whose ideas would it be focused on now, if not Freud and Jung?
I mean, so it's always going to start with Freud, and then they'll go to Otto Kernberg. He's like a big one. I think starting in the 70s. Kohut is another analyst that's paid attention to. Who else would be? Those are kind of like the big ones, but Otto Kernberg is like the big person. And then Hyman Spotness, he founded modern psychoanalysis. So he has the only accredited school in the United States, or he did. He passed away.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Right.
it's not popular overall. It's misunderstood and criticized to huge lengths by people who are unqualified to criticize it. And then it's also used by people who are unqualified to use it. Like when people are like, "Oh, we have unconscious bias," like you don't even know what the hell you're talking about when it comes to the unconscious. People who haven't studied and haven't practiced it, right? So it's also abused all the time. And it's a contradictory. Freud is wrong and crazy, but we use all his ideas in a corrupted way to push our agenda. It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's why you have to read on your own. You don't count on other people in schools to do it for you. People aren't going to feed it to you. And you better talk to other people. Yeah, you learn to think. And you read on your own, that's 50%. The other 50% is to go talk to other people and struggle with it with other people. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I talked to Wyatt. I'm learning. I can know some of the data about Jung, but he knows it better, right? Like in his spirit, he knows it better, for sure. So I learned from him about Jungian things, right? So I'm better for it. That's the contending. I can ask some questions, and my bias comes from this side because of my training and because I'm highly disagreeable and blah 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 blah. Right? But that's how you learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was definitely very interesting talking to him. He was able to manage. So in our original recording, because the first one failed, because a part of the recording got lost by the platform that we're using to record these conversations. It started with alchemy and the influence on Jungian personality.
Yeah.
So also subconscious plays a role there. And he tied it together with the 7 deadly sins, the 7 heavenly virtues, the process of alchemy. So the colors white to yellow to white to red to black, I believe it was, or I got it reversed, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. And then he tied it together with like even the cosmos and the planets and what they symbolize, and the metals, the 7 metals that are on the 7 planets outside of Earth, and how they symbolize the virtues and the sins. And yeah, that was really a wonderful conversation to have. He's definitely the kind of person that can really take a lot of information and somehow spin out, like it is nothing, a whole paper about an idea, and he does it on a daily basis. I don't know how he does it. It's he's a very interesting person to talk with.
Yeah. What a freaking gift, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, but just you saying it, just to start reading Jung in a way to understand, you have to understand alchemy first, right? Isn't that's wild, right? Just like to start understanding Freud, you better understand every mythological story of antiquity just to start, right? Because I'll give you a quick example. When they read sexuality in the English version of Freud's paper, everyone thinks of they think that he's talking about Amor and Psyche, that right. But sometimes he's not. He's talking about Cupid. Cupid is the mischievous, impulsive, sexual deviant, where more psych, that was a developed, mature sex, right? And people don't know when he's talking about whichever one, right? And they just assume whichever one makes sense for them because of their own projections, right? It's like you're not even reading. You don't even know that. You don't know what Cupid's about other than Valentine's Day, right? So you have no freaking idea what the heck that's about. And you don't know in depth the more in psych. So you can't read Freud. Don't tell me about erotic transference if you don't know those things, right? Like, don't even talk to me about it. Like, I get very irritated. That's my disagreeable part of me, right? like if someone talks with authority about it, I get irritated. If someone's like, "Oh, how about this stuff?" I'm like, "Oh, here, no, this and that," right? That's no problem, because then it's just fun, right? You're just learning. Because I don't know, I barely know anything either, right? So it's not the mistake. It's the someone talks with authority about something they don't know about. I think
It's
that
the
offends.
intent.
Yeah, yeah. Like I know more than you, but you don't know jack because
Yeah.
you don't have the foundation. How you trying to build a house on top of trees? You haven't even cut down the trees yet, right? So that's also why I think Jung is very difficult to. It's not popular because yeah, you have to have some understanding of alchemy to even start reading him in a deeper way. And who wants to
Yeah.
learn about alchemy, right? People are watching cat videos.
Yeah. That certainly seems to be the world we're living in nowadays. But it is really good to see that there's a lot of curiosity still.
Yeah.
Um, I've listened to a podcast this morning where it came forward. I believe it was with Joe Rogan, where it came forward that what was it? 70% of Gen Zers. What was the one that came after the millennials? That's Gen Z, right?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have Gen X now. Anyway, so the millennials uh, tend to give the Gen Zers some crap for being lazy and all that sort of stuff. But apparently, those Gen Zers, they're going out of their way to study as much as they can and to work as hard as they can. And what was it? 70. I'm maybe misquoting this, so I would have to double check this. But I believe it was 70% of the new companies started in the United States were by Gen Zers or something like that. They're founding companies. They're doing their best to to succeed or to fail, whatever. But they're really putting their weight, and also going out of their way to vote during the last elections, for example. They have a pretty big voice. They're going out of their way to. I'm not even sure why I'm saying this now. Why it came forward. Right, that genuine curiosity. What I was about to say is that it's really fun to see that even though the climate that we are now living in, there is still genuine curiosity, and a lot of it all around. I'm seeing it on a daily basis with multiple people. It's beautiful to see people that are hungry to learn, that are hungry to grow and to work and to try and to fail and not to be perfect, not to be arrogant, but to really pull their weight and become better at whatever it is they want to do. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. But you know what? Better to be your own boss than have a boss, right? But you're saying 70% of they're doing that. How about the past? So like when millennials and Gen X and the boomers were at this age, were they at the same level of making companies at 70%? I'm curious about that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a number that came forward. I when I heard it, was like, okay, nice,
No.
cool. I have no
Well,
idea how it stacks up against the other generation. No idea.
yeah, so I was wondering if it's any different. Is it higher? Is it lower? And how
Yeah.
come? Right? I mean, it's easier to build a company nowadays. I mean, online you could do it. Totally different
Yeah.
thing to do it 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But still, nonetheless, I always think this next generation is anti-authority and pro-apprenticeship, right? And my disagreeable nature agrees with that, right? Like I have a PhD, so I am the authority. It's like no, you don't. Like you're not the authority, right? Let me see your merit, right? I'm pro Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not judging you on the base of your skin or what degree you have. I'm judging you on the basis of what you say. No, what you do.
Your merit.
Your merit, right? And if we judge people not based on merit, well, that's destructive at minimum.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, Adam, thank you so much for coming on again. It's great seeing you again. Always a pleasure talking with you. You've turned out to be a really good friend throughout the last couple of months. I will say, last half a year even. It's a pleasure talking with you. It's amazing to think about these concepts with you and to struggle with you to find the answer and to see what's what. And it's really a privilege to do that with you. So thank you very much for that.
It's fun. No, it's fun knowing nothing and maybe coming up with a couple of answers we can build on later, right? Because we're not done. It's just a start. It's my favorite stuff.
Yes, sir. All right. Take care of yourself, Adam.
Take it easy.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Adam Ayala. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and if you did, please consider subscribing or following the podcast. I hope to see you here again next time. Until then, and take care.